Hello and welcome to Dateline Hamden. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. And we have one of our favorite guests back in the studio to tell us what's ticking at the state level, the local level, and the deepest recesses of our mind. State Representative Joshua Elliott. Welcome back to Dateline, Josh. How you doing, man?
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, in addition to the stuff we love to talk about, Hamden, where the revolution has been continuing apace.
Yeah.
Including the Red Menace.
The Red Menace?
You got 3 socialists there, man. They're calling themselves socialists.
Yeah.
They're going to be in the washrooms. They're going to be everywhere. And we got the takeover of the government by progressive Democrats. You got the state legislature you've been passing some progressive legislation. And now you're exploring.
Yes.
And that's a term of art.
It is. Exploring
a race for Secretary of the State, which is widely believed to be the only position in next year's statewide elections in which an incumbent Democrat will not be running for re-election. Correct? So a lot of people want that job.
There's a question about what Kevin wants to do. But
Kevin Lembo as the controller.
Right. As far as right now, it seems that Secretary of State is officially the only constitutional
Denise Merrill is
open.
Retiring after 3 terms, right?
That's correct.
So now a whole bunch of people are in. State Representative Hilda Santiago, very respected legislator there.
Yes, very much so.
Matt Lesser.
Yep.
Here in New Haven and New Hamden, we're kind of cornering the market. We got Marissa Bond, the city's health director, surprised everyone. She's exploring. Daryl Bakeen.
Yep.
And Joshua Elliott.
Yeah. And Rob Similcore out of Westport.
Who is that?
He's on the lottery board. And then, of course, I've also heard about 4 or 5 other names of people that don't have exploratories yet. So there's a chance that there could be quite a bit of us.
Lottery board.
Already. So
I guess he figures if you have a chance to win the lottery, you have a chance to become the Secretary of State. Secretary of State's a big deal. It was always a big deal, and it's bigger deal now because what's happening in the country with voting rights.
Right.
Secretary of State's the chief elections official.
Correct.
So you make sure elections run fairly and legally, that everyone has a chance to vote, right to vote, cleaner, all that stuff, candidates filing. And then you also in charge of business records. You're a small business person. You run Time and Season in Hamden, the Natural Foods Emporium. So that's a big job.
Yeah.
And why do you want it?
Good question, Paul. So there's a few reasons. I would say, first and foremost, I'm running on policy. I do think that I have the skill set in terms of my background as an attorney. And
I didn't know you're an attorney.
I am an attorney. I graduated from Quinnipiac Law.
Do you practice law?
I don't practice law. I'm a non-practicing attorney. And of course,
as a small business owner.
Yes.
And as someone who's been involved in political campaigns, understands elections.
Correct. So I've been elected for a few cycles and run actually 2 businesses. There's one in Hamden, one in Shelton, the Common Bond Market. And between them, we have about 100 or so employees. So I know a thing or two about running an office. But when it comes down to it, I'm running on policy. And I'm running on 3 basic platform planks. The first is ranked choice voting, which I know we're going to talk about in a bit. I'm also voting on voting for all. So this year is the first year that people who are on parole can vote. That's about 1,500 or so people, and we have 9,000 or so people who are incarcerated in Connecticut.
Wait, can we slow down on that?
Absolutely, we can.
1,500 people are on parole.
Approximately.
That's all?
Yes. That number could be wrong. That was what it was a few years ago.
And you, Gary Winfield, Robin Porter, you were all pushing for that, right? And the state legislature passed that.
Nothing happens unless a lot of us are pushing for it. But yes, Senator Winfield and Representative Porter were major proponents.
So this year we made it legal for parolees.
That's correct.
So now you say you're looking beyond parolees to
voting for people who are incarcerated right now.
Oh, while you're in prison.
That's absolutely correct.
Well, that's interesting. How would that work?
Maine and Vermont actually never stripped these rights decades and decades ago. And I think it's important to note that these are predominantly white states. And so we should be talking about what are we trying to accomplish when we strip these rights away from people? What are we trying to tell people?
So in the prisons in Vermont and New Hampshire, they vote?
That is correct.
I mean, Vermont, Maine?
Correct. Vermont and Maine.
Do they actively do it? Do they really let them?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And they don't mess around like guards, don't look at who you're voting for, make sure you go for Trump?
Well, that I cannot tell you. I'm not there personally, but as with any sort of issue in terms of tampering a ballot in that way, that would be a federal crime. So I would assume that the guards do not do that.
Yeah, because I would assume there's never any crimes in prison. Sorry, I've been watching too many movies.
That's fair enough.
Okay, so that's the second plank. So voting for all, you want to expand it to in prison, which is very interesting.
That's correct.
And those have been some of your great issues you and Gary and Rob and others have been pushing, where you're looking after phone calls, right?
Right.
It costs so much money. It was pretty sick when those companies were taking advantage of people in
prison. So to just explain what you're talking about, we made telecommunications free for people who are incarcerated. This will actually go into effect next year. Connecticut has now gone from being the most expensive state in the country for $5 for a 15-minute call to now being the first state to free, and that was the bill that I've been championing for a few years. That's like in the old days.
You probably weren't on phones yet. We used to cost us $15 if we're calling someone in England for a few minutes.
Well, I mean, there was a time certainly when people were charged by the minute, but today that doesn't happen. So there's no reason why people should be getting charged per minute now. We can have contracts that fit the board for everybody, and that's what we're trying to aim for.
So voting for all, you got my move from parole to in prisons. What else is voting for all?
That is, voting for all is predominantly is going to be including people who are incarcerated. That's the.
And how many people is that?
Around 9,000 people over the past decade or so. We've gone from a high of about 18,000 to a low of about 9. So we're doing an excellent job in terms of trying to get people out of the prison system. And now, to me, the whole idea should be, what are we doing to not just reduce recidivism, but what are we doing to actually ensure that people have successful reentry? And to me, one of the arguments that we used for this telecommunications bill was essentially this idea of, if you are staying in contact with your loved ones, you are so much more likely to be successful. Same thing to me. If you are able to vote, you are going to be more likely to be in contact with your community, wanting to know what's going on, having a stake in it, and that's the reason that we should be pushing these laws.
All right. So what's the third plank?
The third plank is going to be vote at home initiatives. So one thing I'm really concerned about is that while next year we're going to be voting as a public on the ballot initiative for a constitutional amendment, this would be for early voting. In 3 years, very likely we'll be voting on no excuse absentee voting. The issue is this, is that after we pass these bills or pass these constitutional amendments,
and again, that's to be able to use no excuse absentee ballots.
Correct.
And
early voting.
Right.
And so what's going to happen is that both of these ideas are going to come to the legislature for us to actually craft legislation talking about what we mean when we talk about these things. So here's what I'm talking about. So there's an organization called Vote at Home based out of Colorado, and they are on the vanguard of voting law. And for the past 15 years, they've been working on their systems. And Oregon, Washington, and Colorado are really the trifecta of the states that are really leading on this. And here's what I'm talking about. In these states, you have 3 weeks up to 4 weeks to vote. You have an opt-out versus an opt-in system, simply meaning that if you look at what we did this year, you had to apply for a ballot. In this case, you should automatically receive a ballot, and we can do that by having much expanded automatic voter registration. How do we do that? We can interface with the United States Postal Service, and by doing that, we know exactly where people live, so we know exactly who to send these ballots to.
Though people move a lot that the Postal Service doesn't catch, right?
So it's not just the Postal Service. You're going to use a number of metrics.
DMV.
That's the DMV certainly is one thing that we implemented in 2016. There's a lot of things that we can do to ensure that we have much better automatic voter registration, and to me, the goal should be constantly pushing on these issues.
Mm-hmm. And vote at home is what?
Is essentially that you can 30 days out, you can drop your ballot off at the post office. You can drop it off in a ballot box. You can drop it off.
I'm sorry, being ignorant. How's that different from early voting?
It's different from early voting because you don't have to go necessarily in person. You can be voting at different sites and different locations. It's similar, but just slight different.
All right. Josh Elliott, State Rep Hamden, has an exploratory committee for Secretary of State. It doesn't say exploring Secretary of State. You have to say exploring state office.
That's right.
Candidates have to go through all these bizarre...
You can say exploring Secretary of State. But you have to say exploring, not running for.
But I thought it has the committee itself. The candidates are always saying they have to be careful not to say the committee is for Secretary of State. Well, they could say it out loud. You just say you can write that.
You can't say that you have a committee for Secretary of State. You can say that you have an exploratory committee. So what's this all about?
This sounds, to the average person, this sounds nuts. I mean, why do you have to say exploratory, and why can't you name the committee? Is this about how much money you can raise?
There's two big reasons. One is you can normally for a regular committee you can raise about $270 or so dollars. If you have an exploratory, you can raise $375. The thing I'm talking about, of course, is CEP, the Citizens Election Program.
Public financing. If you want to qualify for getting matching dollars,
that's correct. So I have to
agree not to take special interest money and to limit how much you raise from each individual.
That's correct. So I have to raise $75,000 with a minimum and maximum per donor. And what that will do is that will get me about $400,000, and I might be off by $50,000 here and there. But the general gist is you get about $400,000 for the primary to run for August, and you get that after the convention in May.
And then you can get in the general election another batch.
And then, well, yes, that's correct.
And people are going to raise millions if they're not in CP, right? For these offices, a lot of stakes. Special just have a lot of stake.
Certainly, in other states, these constitutional seats very often will be in the millions of dollars. What CEP has done for Connecticut, it has dramatically reduced the amount of money that gets spent on these campaigns. And
you
I
have
think
the pressure to show you're running clean, And
Yeah.
even if somebody else raises a lot of money, the theory is that you get enough to get your word out. It's not always that you need more money. When Linda McMahon goes to
That's
$50
correct.
million to run for the Senate, probably after the first $10 million, people heard her name and the rest was kind of just thrown away, right?
Right. It's just a barrier to entry. And even for myself, when I ran in 2016 for my state rep seat, there was no way I was going to be able to raise $33,000. So instead, I raised that $5,000, $28,000 from the state, allowed me to run my campaign. And it puts everybody at an even playing field.
And so
too.
why not just go straight to the committee? Why do you go to exploratory first?
So there's two reasons. One
to
is
be
that
able to raise more per individual.
you can raise
Can
more.
you transfer that money over when you become an official committee?
It can convert. The thing you have to keep in mind is that before the convention in May, you cannot spend more than $75,000. So even if you're raising more than $75,000, if you spend more than that, then you're going to have big problems, and we've seen that in the past. The other thing that you can do when you have an exploratory is, let's say I'm running for seat X. Well, what ends up happening is let's say it seems like polling is really bad for me up until 2 weeks out, and then all of a sudden this other seat opens up. I can actually convert my exploratory now to be a campaign for that other seat.
So now, if you raise the $375 from an individual rather than $270 in the exploratory phase, you're still allowed to send that money over to the new committee.
You can,
when you announce that you're an official candidate.
yes.
So you've kind of bypassed the intent if you got an extra $125 a person. I know it doesn't make the difference in what they're going to affect you, but doesn't that?
I mean, what you can do
subvert
is
the
use all
idea?
that money, convert, and then re-raise that money, because the idea is
So on the day you convert and you have some money left over, you can send that money to your new committee.
no.
Oh, you can't.
I'll be honest, Paul. A lot of this I'm not entirely
Okay,
sure
but
about,
that
which
would
is
make sense
also to
then.
be clear why I'm being super extra careful
No, so it makes
to not
sense.
even bother raising
Well, I
more
think
than
you have to-
$250
you have to
because
be-
I don't want to get into trouble.
But you have to be in Mensa to like figure it all. I'm not in Mensa, I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but if you're in Mensa, you might be able to keep in your mind all these
Sure.
rules.
Well, you also, I mean, if you're being careful and you're being conservative, which I'm being both, then it's not something that you even have to worry about. So I'm not.
So you're sticking to 270.
I'm sticking to the 270 because I just don't want to even bother getting in trouble. I'm running a really tight ship right now. I'm not going to spend a lot of money up until the very end, and then we'll see what I need to spend. But for right now, it's going to be a really
And then
tight
the
ship.
public, you're kind of showing you're all in when you announce that you're not exploratory anymore. When
Right.
do you expect to make that decision?
Oh, that won't be for a while. First of all, I want to see who else is definitely in the race. And we're mid-November now. There's certainly some people that will probably announce this month. I think by the time you get to December, January, it gets harder and harder. It's not that you can't be going around to those DTC meetings around the state.
Democratic
It's
Town
just-
Committee.
That's correct. It's just that a lot of the work has been done over the course of the summer up until now. And so to throw your hat in now, there's just a lot of relationships that you have to build. And it's not a matter of just being known. It's a matter of actually knowing people personally. And it's
So
hard to
here's
do
the
that in a short
softball
period of
question.
time.
I got it teed up. Make
Sure.
your swing. Why do you want to be the Secretary of State?
Well, first of all, like I said, it's the policy issues, and it allows me to be in front of a whole lot of people with a reason to be in front of them talking about policy. I could be just Josh Elliott, the state
But
rep.
why this policy? Why don't you want to be controller policy? Why don't you want to be transportation policy?
No, when I talk about policy, I'm talking about the policies that I'm running on: ranked choice voting, voting for all,
why,
and vote
why
at home.
those policies? Why do you want the job
Yes.
where you can advocate for ranked choice voting?
Oh, because I've been advocating for them for about 5 years now, and
so in
they
other words,
just
these
they
are
aren't making
issues that have
traction.
been central to your agenda.
Oh, I've been introducing them for the last 3 terms, yeah. So, and I'm having a hard time getting them through the committee. So my feeling is this. Okay, so we can't get it through the committee right now, but what can we do? We can plant the seeds in the minds of people around the state who are closely connected to this process, so that in 5 or 10 years from now, no matter what happens with my candidacy, people will have these ideas in their head already. And what's really important to me, if you look at the cannabis fight, is just normalize and popularize ideas. You talk about it enough times, people become comfortable and familiar with it, and then it becomes far less alien, and it feels like it's within that Overton window.
And we've talked about that. When you're in office, one thing you learned is that it's a multi-year fight to do
Yes.
something new. So
That's
you
correct.
mentioned legalizing cannabis, which happened.
You're right.
We talked about this predated you somewhat, but not I think it completely predated you. Back banning the death penalty. That was Gary Woodfield every
right.
year. What would be some other examples of where you had success by popularizing and normalizing an idea, and then it got passed after a bunch of years?
Well, I would say the telecommunications bill was a really big one. But then following in the footsteps of the cannabis bill, because, I there was that piece, I was talking about this yesterday with somebody, is that I went with Dan Haar, the journalist, up to Massachusetts to purchase over the borders, just to show like how sort of silly and outdated our laws were. One thing I'll talk about now is that I'm really in the fight now for psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, which we've seen. There's a lot of studies that have been done both at Yale, but then Johns Hopkins and NYU, and we're getting federal grants, and we're in phase 2 trials, and we're seeing just some incredible outcomes.
Shifting on that. I mean, I think you saw the other day about military veterans who just saw such trauma.
Right.
They're finding that psilocybin is enabling them to process the trauma in a way that enables them to
depression, trauma, addiction.
Function. It's like the only way.
Migraines. It has a whole host of uses, and we're trying to figure out all the different uses that can be good for.
I mean, I think we were heading toward there with LSD, but especially psilocybin 2 generations ago. And I think when it became used so much recreationally.
Well, we're not seeing a whole lot of research being done on LSD right now, but we are seeing a lot done on MDMA. So MDMA is actually going to be
ecstasy.
Ecstasy is sort of like the street name because you never know what's really in it. So MDMA is like the much more technical name. And what we're actually seeing is that we have some phase 3 trials right now with MDMA. So within the next couple of years, we could actually be seeing it used.
I mean, the idea being
medically.
that society was moving in a way where these substances were really helpful to people wrestling with some deep-rooted psychological challenges. And then I think when they became to be used so recreationally in the 60s and 70s, there was this cultural opposition that developed.
Well, it wasn't even so much that, yes, they were being used recreationally. They have never stopped being used recreationally. But I think what ended up happening was that people who were trying to do some serious research on it got lumped in with people who were doing research a little bit less seriously. And I think that that ended up muddying the waters. So what we've seen now is that people that are in the industry of research and researching this drug specifically, they are being much more careful and much more methodical so that we don't have a repeat of what happened in the 70s.
So you talked about, Josh, you'd like to, as Secretary of State, work on issues that have been close to your heart that you pushed over the years, such as, have you had bills about voting? Well, you did voting for all parole. So now you have a bill about prison voting and voting at home. You have bills on those.
And ranked choice voting, yes.
So now ranked choice voting. So we're talking to Josh Elliott, state rep from Hamden, exploring running for Secretary of the State, and key to his candidacy is an idea called ranked choice voting, which you read a lot about if you read the New Haven Independent, which several states and a couple cities around the country have actually 20 cities, and then Maine and Alaska, but New York City is the latest. They have ranked choice voting, and it means that you can vote for more than one candidate. You can vote for all the candidates you're interested in, and you rank them. So then the person with the least votes gets eliminated in the first round of counting, and then that person's voters' second choices get added. The theory is, if I have it right, Josh, because I am a proponent of this, not that it matters whether I'm a proponent, is that it can stop being a winner takes all lesser of two evils way of voting for office. You vote for people you want, and you vote for them in order so that you feel like if there's somebody you want to make sure doesn't win, you can still put a vote for someone to stop that person. But first you get the person you would most like to see actually have the job. And the theory is that it also promotes more positive policy-oriented debate because you don't want to alienate supporters of somebody else who might also vote for you second. And we saw a lot of that in New York when Yang, running for mayor, was telling people to vote for, who was the Catherine Garcia. And then on the left, the people, Meyer Wiley, and those people were pooling their votes. Has it worked out the way we said, or have we learned that it might be too complicated?
Oh, it's definitely not too complicated. I think that it's simply a barrier to entry to explain to somebody, and somebody has to want to understand it. And if they want to understand it, they will understand it. If they simply don't want to, then it doesn't matter what you do, they won't understand it. My
favorite article in the New York City Mayor's Race, which of course I followed like a weenie because I said, well, actually I suppose it's exciting. And it did work, by the way. It turned out people wanted Eric Adams. It was possible Garcia had somebody second place. She might have gotten it, but people wanted Garcia. And the Wall Street Journal had a story saying people so confused about it.
Okay, so
let me tell you what happened in the article.
Sure, go ahead.
They found only one human being who actually said they were confused, and that person figured it out. So in fact, people weren't crazy confused. People were able to figure out, I'm going to vote in order for who I want.
That's right. So that was
my favorite article.
I have found that trying to explain this to people has really not been that hard of a problem, and it's simply a matter of just if somebody doesn't know, just spending 30 seconds with them and they'll get it.
Would this require a constitutional amendment?
It would not require a constitutional amendment as far as I know. That said, I want to be clear that I don't think that ranked choice voting is necessarily ready for prime time in Connecticut. And I think that, A, we need to make sure that all the tabulators that we get in this coming year will be ready for this. And I also think that ultimately the problem that party bosses have with ranked choice voting specifically is that you actually need to aggregate all of the ballots in one place to be able to do this. Right now, you can get all the information from all these different voting locations and be able to tally everything up. But you actually need every single ballot itself to be able to do this.
And why
tallying.
do party bosses not like that?
Because what ends up happening is it just takes longer to know the results. And what people really, really want are to know the results right away. And so there might be an additional cultural shift if we move to ranked choice voting. That means that it might take a little bit longer to get those results.
Do we still have party bosses?
Sure, we have party bosses. Yeah, I mean,
chairs. When we think about John Golden in New Haven, Arthur Berry, when we talk about Bailey in the state, in those days, the party boss, the Democratic Party chairman, would be able in the background to decide who was going to be the candidate. Rarely could a challenger like a Josh Elliott have won a state rep seat. Rarely could he even have any chance of getting delegates to get on a ballot for Secretary of State. But we liberalized our laws, and a lot of times the people the state party chairman want to run don't end up being the candidate. Am I wrong about that?
A lot of that has to do with CEP, with the funding.
But even before that, open primaries and America's loss of allegiance to institutions, so that unaffiliated voters are now the largest group of voters, but also primary campaigns, the way nationally the Democrats, Republicans, their party bosses would like their candidates to be in the center, and often they're not because who's in the party deciding.
Well,
that.
Just because party bosses maybe don't have as much power as they used to doesn't mean that there's no longer party bosses.
So who are the bosses?
They would be like the Democratic Town Committee chairs, the people who are on State Central, the people who are on the executive board for CT Dems. You know, everybody has a different amount of influence.
And you think
power.
it's just ranked choice is just about how long the results, or do you think they'd like to be able to?
Well, that's just one problem. The other problem is also just granular, is that people on the GAE committee, which oversees everything election-related,
elections,
just aren't interested in this bill.
Yeah, why?
But why is that? That's
when you've tried to convince them, and so is the whole lobbying committee in the state.
The argument that I have heard is that vote at home is so much more important, that these early voting and no excuse absentee initiatives are so important that we should be focusing all of our attention on that. I would disagree with that argument because I got about 40 to 45 bills through my committee this year, and you simply just you can keep on working on more than one thing at a time.
I also disagree with that ranking, but yeah.
But it just so. That is the argument. It's not one that I agree with.
So they just kind of say, like, okay, Josh, that's your nice kind of hippy-dippy idea.
Sure.
But, like, there's nobody really cares about this, so we're not going to.
And so I'm taking the show on the road, Paul. Yep. That's
so
right.
So tell me why it's important to have. I gave you my take. What about you?
No, I think you nailed it. I think you got it exactly right. I think for me what's really important, too, is that anybody who wins will have to win by majority vote. You have to win with 50% plus. And that is because if anybody has less than 50%, you just keep on running the new tally with the last person off. And I think that means that you're not going to have a Governor LePage like we had in Maine, right, who was a far-right candidate. You know, alternatively, this could mean that we don't have far-left candidates either, but I think for a lot of people...
Or even Josh Elliott.
Or potentially Josh Elliott. But I am not particularly concerned about not having people on the fringes.
You know what, so I say, like, people like you, people like me, we wouldn't call it fringes on the left. We'd say people who actually like believe in some of these issues,
sure,
or whatever.
I mean, I don't consider myself fringe.
So in our hearts, I think we believe that in supporting ranked choice voting, we're not helping to elect Democrats.
Oh, I disagree. I think all that it does is that it ensures...
No, I'm saying we believe that ranked choice voice does not favor either party.
Oh, I don't think so. Yeah,
right.
I would agree with that.
In my heart, I believe that. I think the experiments have shown that that's true, except for one election year. One election year did affect Democrats, but other years affect Republicans.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But the only people who support it are liberal Democrats. What's that about?
I think that could be changing. There's that new party, Sam, and I think that they support ranked choice voting and their
American movement.
Yeah.
It was Oz Griebel before he died.
That's right. I do think that you know,
they are for that because they're a third party.
If an idea starts with the left or starts with the right, I think that there's going to be a lot of eyebrow raising from the other side. Until you really keep talking about it. I would say even something like voting at home really doesn't necessarily
Well,
favor
of course,
Democrats.
in Florida, the absentee ballot stuff favors Republicans. In Pennsylvania,
But that's my point. Is that a lot of these,
and Arizona, the Republicans were so against the liberalization of voting rules when they often were benefiting with the elderly.
That's right. That's right. There are
But there it was again. Liberal Democrats are for it, even though it didn't necessarily have liberal Democrats. It's kind of interesting dynamic.
Yeah, but I also think that, and maybe this is wrong, but I think that by and large, people who want to make big wholesale changes to the system generally reside on the left, and folk on the right generally are not necessarily against those changes, but maybe they're against how far those changes go or how quickly they go.
I think conservatives are, by traditional conservatives, I would argue since 1980, the election of Ronald Reagan, the much more radical changes in government, which was basically to starve the beast, as they put it.
Right. I
think they had fundamental changes looking at government, and that the new Supreme Court majority is looking for fundamental changes.
That's true.
In a right-wing direction that supports the wealthy.
I also wouldn't say that every single Republican or person on the right is like that.
Sure.
And that's the thing, is that I think a lot of people who are up at the Capitol that I work with do have much more nuanced ideas about where we should be going.
All right, and where we're going is the race for Secretary of State. State Rep Josh Elliott has an exploratory committee, and he's here on Dateline Hamden at WNHH FM 102.5, live streamed at NewHavenIndependent.org. So how's the race going? How hard are you campaigning? Where are you going, and what's the reaction?
Oh my God, it's I'm either filled with complete anxiety or complete calm. I'm the kind of person who can run at 100% with 100% knowledge that I'll lose. I mean, I think that was really important for me when I openly announced against the sitting Speaker of the House. And
Brennan Sharkey,
and it was me against the rest of the town when he decided not to run. So I have this headspace where I can just completely sink myself into something and not be worried about the result. And I think that
your identity's not tied up in winning political office.
And I think what that does for me is it allows me a lot more freedom. I think what I'm particularly good at is I'm good at one-on-ones. I'm good at creating structures for myself to make sure that I'm using my time very well. And I'm all around the state, and in terms of where we are in the process right now, the summer leading up into elections, there's a lot of events. So you go to a lot of these places to meet a lot of people and to be seen by a lot of people. But then what happens after November is that there is a very slow time from now until session or so. Because what happens is next year, these Democratic town committees in around January, February are completely changing over who is on these committees.
Oh, so what? Some of the people you might have been trying to woo this year aren't going to be voting next year.
Some towns will stay the same, some towns will change dramatically. And so you want to plant those seeds, but either way, it's not until February through May where you can really be around the state to actually
And what happened? Can you completely bypass, or do you need the party structure? Do you need a minimum of delegates at a convention to qualify for a primary? Or can you still completely petition your way on?
You can petition your way on, but it would be incredibly difficult. You need 15% at the convention of the delegates,
and then you're on the ballot.
If
you don't get that, how many signatures do you need?
I don't know. I don't plan on finding out.
Oh, so you would not pursue signatures?
Oh, I would not pursue signatures.
Your plan is get your 15% or get out.
I'm not going to tell you that I'll be line A, Paul, but I will tell you that I feel very confident that I'll be on the ballot. And right now,
which ballot's that?
On the ballot for the primary.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So
you're confident you're going to get your 15%?
I'm confident I'll get the 15%. I could be wrong. Who knows? But I'm confident I can get the 15%. One thing that does make it hard is the fact that there's a lot of us. But I would say that Senator Lesser and Representative Santiago and myself have a major leg up in this competition, specifically because we have relationships across the state, given that being in the Capitol and working with other legislators that are representing these other towns.
Well, I was trying to remember the last time there was not a state rep who became Secretary of State, which makes sense because you've crafted laws that you're then going to move on to try to either implement or advocate for.
I mean, that helps with the administration of the job. But
I'm trying to think, so now we got Merrill, who was, you had Bysowitz, who was, you had Pauline Keyser, who I believe was, you had Miles Rappaport, who was. Julia Tashjian was not, correct? So she would be the first one going back who was not actually a state legislator.
Right. So it just gives you a big leg up. So right now, from here up until January, February, my time is going to be spent predominantly raising money, meeting with the chairs who will most likely be chairs next year, meeting with folk from CT Central, and just trying to constantly be engaged with people.
What are you hearing? What are people telling you?
It's an open race. It's totally open. There's a poll that just came out last week from Sacred Heart University.
Oh yeah, they polled on this already.
It's the very first poll
wow.
out. And so while Matt and Hilda have about 6+ years on me being politically involved, we're all within 1 percentage point of each other right now.
How much is that?
So Hilda was, I think, 8.3, Matt was 7.8, I was 7.3, there's 0.6 undecided, and then there's 75%, 0.6 was other, and 75% was undecided, which means that this field is just totally wide open. Now, that was out of 1,000 Democrats. That wasn't people that are going to be voting at the convention next May, because that could be very different. But it all comes down to, of these 1,800 to 2,000 people.
Bond did not show up on that.
They would have showed up in that 0.6%, but that is what I'm talking about, is that not only do you have the relationships, but you've gotten your name out in the press and you've worked in legislation, and people can say, it's nice that you're saying you're going to do this thing, but show us what you've done. And so we can actually point to things that we've done too. There's just added benefit. It's not to say that we're going to do the job better. It's very hard to know, but there are certain things that we can point to that make us more of a concrete entity in people's minds when they think of a candidate.
Yeah, and tied to the work. And I mean, from your very first term, you emerged as a visible leader of the progressive wing of the Democrats up at the Capitol. I mean, you really carved that niche.
Yes. Having
been elected after working on Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign, and with like-minded people who worked on that campaign, you decided to bring it local.
Right.
So how's that worked out, Josh Elliott?
It's worked out pretty well. I have not been, I would say, it was not me who made the huge turnover happen in Hamden. It was, of course, I was on the vanguard of it. I was in one of the first people out that recognized that our town maybe needed some changes in terms of representation.
Turned bluer politically, and it turned blacker and browner demographically.
Sure, yeah, that is a way to put it. And what we just saw was, over the course of the next 6 years after I got elected, more and more people wanted to get involved and wanted to see some big changes in our town in terms of transparency, in terms of outlook. And right now, I think we have just one of the most diverse DTCs in the state. And not only that, we had a huge win this November, I should say, where we now have a woman, Lauren Garrett, who's our mayor, and the diversity across the board for city council and board of ed is just unmatched.
Last year, the progressive wing took control of the Democratic Party town committee.
That's correct.
And then the wing fielded 19 candidates, I believe, and won every race, I believe, except
not every race.
Not against every Republican, right? They lost to one Republican.
We lost one race, and that was in my district. It's tough. It's the northern part of Hamden, and it's just much more conservative.
Trump signs up there, right?
That's right. And even when I win it, and I win it with, it's like 50-50 by like 50, 100 or so votes. It's very close.
Your races are close?
No. My race is in, so I have 4 districts. So in the
but
top
not where you
part,
live.
But then, so directly where I live. But then the rest of my district where I don't live, which is more of like the middle of Hamden, I'll win that like 80-20.
Gotcha.
With huge turnout. So it just offsets.
So how did you end up in the redder part? Because you like nature?
Because I like nature. I moved there because of law school, and the business, and I was not political at the time, and I didn't know anything about politics in Hamden. It wasn't until 4 or 5 years after I lived there that I started getting involved. So it just happens to be that I'm when I leave my house during campaign season, I see my opponent's signs everywhere. It's like, well, all right, what are you gonna do?
and it's great to be around people who don't agree with you.
Yeah, I have no problem with it.
Yeah, you're
no
cool
problem with it. Yep.
Were you supporting? I take it the progressive wing that did take over the party and take over the government. Are you feeling good about a Gary administration?
I was out the gate supporting the slate, and happily did so. And I think she'll do a great job. I do think that the problems of Hamden right now far surpass what one person can possibly achieve on their own. I do think that if you have somebody who has the backing of the party and the backing of the people that are in the community, and you have a 10-year plan, and you are allowed the time to implement that plan, that I think we can get out of this mess. But
what specifically needs to happen?
We have a debt per capita ratio that is one of the worst in the state, if not the worst. And that is what we need to be rifling our way through.
And how do you do that? How do you get rid of that? Do you renegotiate with unions?
There's no secrets. It's renegotiations. It is cutting costs. It is being smarter in terms of your hires and more efficient with people's time. And maybe you have a tax increase that actually gets you to where you need to be. I think what ended up happening was we were so slow in implementing tax increases that the debt burden just kept on growing because of the interest. Well, if you had...
But you're over 50 mils now.
We're at 52.
Psychological...
Yeah.
That was a psychological
Well,
barrier.
and there was always this feeling, if you ever go over 50 mils, people are going to leave in droves. Well, that hasn't happened, and Hamden is still a very great place to live. My feeling is fix the problem now, and then... fight through that
you didn't
pain,
mention
and then you'll get to the
revenue
other side of
growth,
it.
which is the easy thing to always say when you're running for office. I want to build our tax base, but then how do you actually do it?
Right.
And part of the problem is Spring Glen, right? So they're not going to go for more density or mixed use, right? Because for all the progressive politics.
Yeah,
and
but Spring Glen
signs,
is just one place in Hamden, and Hamden is a huge town.
Right,
we have 65,000
and
people.
also by Quinnipiac, you could be developing that, which
you
is
need
less
a lot more development. That's what you look around to North Haven,
but you need
and you see what they've
infrastructure
done well.
there. You need sewers up there, right?
You need sewers up there. That's right, and that's one thing that Lauren has been talking about, which I would love because I am on septic where I live. But I think that, yes, the other side of the coin is, of course, bringing businesses in. Easier said than done.
Right,
and that is
then
a
if you do it with
long-term
incentives,
plan.
that's 5 years, so you're not going to be doing anything with the mill rate with that.
That's right.
But Eric Johnson seems to be really focused on that. He wants to do some of the stuff you're doing in New Haven, everything from the phase-ins, if you create more value, which I'm not sure if those work or not. That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
The facade improvements, but also zoning. He wants to see some more density and some more mixed use in properties. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I feel great about that. And one thing I've always been very frustrated by in Hamden is the fact that we have no downtown area, and if I want to go somewhere, I'll generally find myself going to New Haven. I love Hamden.
God forbid, we like when you're in New Haven.
No, I joke that I'm almost as much of a New Haven rep as I am a Hamden rep, just because I spend so much time here. So I would say that is one of my frustrations is the economic development piece and bringing new places in.
Do you think they could do a Quinnipiac kind of town gown commercial development? It would be different from New Haven. It's a different kind of college, but
I think you have to build that relationship first and see where it goes. I don't think we can never be Yale New Haven.
But you don't want to be. Could you be QU Hamden?
QU Hamden, and that is a real open question.
More people, right? How many people at QU?
I don't know the number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Big school.
Yeah. And you went there for law.
I went there for law.
How was it?
I loved it. It was great. I got a big scholarship from there. And I only say that smiling because I got rejected from a lot of other
And why
institutions.
didn't you practice?
Why don't I? I never had interest in doing that. I went for a basis in both politics and business.
And it is good when you're passing laws to know how laws work.
I think what has been really good about being an attorney is just it's taught me how to think, and it's taught me how to evaluate ideas and arguments without personalizing them and knowing that
and you are good at that. That is important.
Yeah, and it's not always the strength of the argument that wins the day. Very often it is how you deliver the argument as well, and you need to know what other people are thinking and to be able to counteract the counter arguments as quickly and early as possible.
Are you scared to shop in Hamden?
Not even remotely, no.
What was that all about, Josh? Because when we did a story on it, we found out there are only 3 reported muggings ever at the Hamden Plaza.
I mean, it's what rumors and gossip does. It's what social media has done. You take one small nugget of truth and you blow it up, and all of a sudden it seems like a much bigger problem than it is.
But you're facing that state level because the state Republican Party has made a point leading into next year's election.
Sure, they got to run on something.
Crime,
they can't run on things that are going great.
Are they going great?
I think things are going pretty well. I mean, yes, we have a pandemic, but if you compare us to other states, we're doing better in terms of crime. We're doing better in terms of outcomes with the disease. Yeah, of course. I mean, nothing's ever perfect, but you can't compare us to perfect. Compare us to how other states are doing.
And how about education? What kind of issues do we need to contend with there? From the right, we're hearing it's critical race theory.
I mean, you're talking about critical race theory.
No, anything. What needs to be happening with schools?
Well, it's the same thing as it always is. It's funding, and it's less reliance on the property tax, which is highly regressive and hits the middle class harder than everybody else. Other states have county-based systems where you ensure that there's some semblance of progressivity in the tax structure.
I don't think we're
don't
going
have
to
that.
counties. We have had this. It's funny when Lamont won the primary. He said that night, "I'm going to give incentives for regionalization." So even if you're not formally counties, you get towns like Hamden, New Haven to put together the departments. It's not really happening. But do you think that happens?
It's really hard to do. I mean, one thing it's going to require
really
is since we don't have counties. The reliance is going to come from the state, and we do have ways of sending back money to towns. The problem is that, of course, it's never enough, and we left ourselves just way too much leeway.
But you fundamentally said that we should be taxing the wealthy more.
Oh yeah.
That people make over $1 million a year should be paying on that extra money, not their first million or $500,000. You know, more than the 6.99%. You'd like to see them pay 7.5% and have capital gains
more
taxed.
than 7.5. 7.5 is conservative. You know, I'm talking about voting issues because I have an exploratory for Secretary of State. My headspace is and the long-term vision of like one of the biggest things I want to be tackling is our tax problem, is the fact that the ultra wealthy in our state.
You've always been argued a lot that you know, it hasn't been since 2014 that the Department of Revenue Services even studied the tax burden for the wealthy.
We're going to be doing that again.
I know, because you passed that this year.
I've been pushing for that.
But even there, we found that it was dramatic. I forget the numbers, but like twice the percentage that wealthy people pay in state and federal taxes, or state and local taxes, I guess, in Connecticut was a small fraction.
It's almost 4 times.
About a middle class person. If you're a chef, if you're
if you make 50,000 or less, it's around like 24%. And that again includes state and local taxes, and a lot of that is the property tax. And if you're wealthy, because your home is going to be such a smaller percentage of what you overall own,
and
especially in comparison
to
your
progressive income tax.
That's right. Well, I mean, we do have a progressive income tax. It's just not progressive enough to offset how bad the other taxes are.
And what's the percentage? So you say it's a 4-to-1 ratio.
It's around like 6.5% to 7%.
Wow. But you got a supermajority elected in the Senate for Democrats. You got
we had one for a very short period.
And you had
and then
a Democratic governor who said to you personally, "No, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not going to punish success."
On multiple times. That's right.
He's from Greenwich.
You remember that?
Yep.
It was just as jarring to me as
the
it probably
Greenwich
was
governor
to you when I told
who was living off inherited wealth and goes to the yacht club, says, "Sorry, Josh, those people deserve to pay less in taxes because they make so much money. I'm not going to punish them."
I was surprised by that argument because, generally speaking, the argument that we hear is that if you do that, it'll have deleterious effects and people will leave the state. We know that's wrong. We have data to show that it's wrong over long periods of time, that people just don't move in and out of a state because of taxes. They move for a multitude of other reasons. And you look to a place like California and you could say, okay, we're not California. Sure, I see that point. But you look to a place like California and they have a top tax rate of like 13.5% or 14%.
But that's marginal, right? That's not your first million.
That is marginal. That's correct. Yeah.
And then how he taxed capital gains is an issue.
That's also an issue. And what ended up happening in 1991 when we married capital gains and the income tax is that we brought the capital gains tax rate way down. And all that did was end up being a huge boon to the ultra wealthy. And people have in their head that all of a sudden it was like this really great progressive tax. Is actually, in many ways, it was actually highly detrimental to our tax base. But we also didn't know at that point in time how reliant we would end up being.
The Democrats are fully in charge, and you couldn't move the needle on this. Where does it go next? He's not going to run. Well, he's running for re-election. I'm the guy who doesn't raise taxes on anything.
You wait. You keep the idea alive. You keep on talking about it. You make sure people know about it, and you wait. And then you have, hopefully next time around, the person who runs for that office gets there.
And Josh Elliott waited and kept pushing a bunch of issues that have passed, like the cannabis law. It's legal now.
Yep.
The next step is rolling it out. So what is this cannabis market that takes place outside the Space Ballroom? Are they selling? Because my friend said they go there.
They are not selling. What they are doing is they are gifting.
Oh, gifting. So you can go there and get free samples in case you want to shop with them.
Yeah, but you may have to buy something else from them to be able to get that gift.
So how does that work?
I couldn't tell you exactly how it works, but it's as it sounds. You buy something else from them, and then after you purchase whatever that thing is, they will gift to you some cannabis because it's decriminalized, and we don't have that regulatory market for them. I think a big argument that was made, which I agree with, is if you look at beer sales, well, look at all these people that brew on their own. I am one of those people. How are you going to get...
You make beer or wine?
I make beer. How are you going to get... Yeah, it's fun. How are you going to get people that are new to making beer unless you have people that can do it on their own? Now, there's a limit, of course. You can't make more than something like 200 barrels a year on your own. But the whole idea to me should be that you ought to allow people to grow on their own so that if they want to get into the industry, you have people that are able to do it.
Well, we can grow on our own now, right?
We can grow on our own, but what you can't do is you can't grow and then sell. So there is a slight distinction. That's a fair point. But I do.
I wasn't arguing. I was just trying to understand.
Yeah, well, it's a point in a non-argumentative sense. I think that people ought to be able to grow on their own and then also sell to smaller markets. And be part of the framework as well. And right now that does not really exist. We really have limited it to bigger players.
Why don't we want the small people to become bigger players? Why would we limit them just because too much lobbying for the big guys?
No, it's because there was this big concern of, look at what California did. It became the Wild West. You have all these weed shops. And it's just like, all right. So,
yeah, what's wrong with that?
Who cares?
We like having a lot of restaurants, right, and gas stations.
Who cares? It's fine. And then if there's a glut in the market, then people won't be successful, and then it's just like you have market economics play out.
What kind of beer do you make?
So it's been a couple years, but I'll just do the IPAs. It's one of those things
IPAs.
where I love IPAs too. I make terrible IPAs.
Oh, you do?
I have just not.
I won't be raiding your house then.
There's no. Yeah. It's difficult to do. There's so many steps, and you have to be very.
Historically, wasn't IPA the dregs that they didn't sell, and then it turned out people really liked it?
Oh, I have no idea. I do know that originally the bitters were used to actually ensure that the beer did not rot on over these long trips overseas, and so it was really meant as just a
how do you
way
make
to keep
the beer?
them. How do you make it? It's 4 ingredients. It's water, hops, yeast, and sugar. And you boil the hops, and you get you boil the grain, and you convert the starch into simple sugars, and then what ends up happening after you have that mash is you add the yeast to it, and then the yeast eats those sugars and creates CO2 that what makes it bubbly, and then the alcohol, and then boom, there you go. There's your.
So why don't
sugar.
yours taste good?
Because if even a little bit of bacteria, any step of the way, and there's a lot of steps, gets into that beer, it can create an off taste. There's also the problem of when you're washing out the grain and you're trying to get all the simple sugars into your mash. It's a very slow and hard process to make sure you're extracting as much as possible.
So you did all that work, and you said, "Man, it still don't come out right. I'm going around the corner for a beer."
I've done it. Yeah, I have all the equipment, and it's one of those things that's better done with a partner. I've always brewed alone, and so I think I would need to find a partner where I really.
So your answer is don't brew alone.
Yeah, I would say don't brew alone. You can. I've read a lot of books on it, and it's still easier just to be like, I got a free Sunday, I'll do it today, instead of like having this whole thing organized. But that's the way to do it. You got to bring friends in.
I was a total fair kombucha. I tried it for months.
Yeah.
And because it cost so much you buy at the store, and I loved the SCOBY.
Yeah.
Because I felt like it was a science experiment, like you had brains growing in your jars.
Right.
And that it was free. Once you do it, you get it replicating. Like you can't even catch up with how it replicates.
Kombucha.
So I was excited. I love kombucha too, but we spent tons of money on it because it just stunk.
Yeah,
the stuff I made was like watery, didn't have much flavor.
Yeah, it's tough.
And it's just not as good as that incredibly expensive stuff.
It makes you appreciate good beer and good kombucha, though.
Oh, definitely. And do you sell kombucha at your stores?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What's your favorite flavor?
The Mystic Mango is my favorite flavor.
See, I don't go as much for the fruity, although I like the ginger.
Yeah, ginger's good too.
I like the tantric turmeric.
Okay, that's good too. I like the turmeric. That's good.
Cleans you up. I like the variety.
Yeah.
I like having a little bit of something different.
I agree.
Yeah, all right. Josh Elliott, it's such a treat to have you. The time flies by. Good luck on your exploring. Because you've been a person who always explores.
Yeah.
Whether it's making your own beer or a law school, running a natural foods place, working in the state legislature. Now you're exploring a run for state secretary of the state.
That's correct.
How would people learn more about your campaign?
JoshForCT.com is the place to go. I'm on all different forms of social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you look up Josh for CT, I'll be there. And just follow along as
You're not hard to find.
I'm not that hard to find.
You might even throw in an old bottle IPA.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Josh Elliott. Thanks for listening in. And we're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all weekend long at WNHH, Hamden's and New Haven's home for community radio.